the U.S. Supreme Court once ruled that corporations possess the same First Amendment free speech rights as individual citizens. That single decision, Citizens United v. Federal Election Commission, fundamentally reshaped the American political landscape, unleashing unprecedented amounts of money into elections. Before 2010, there were far stricter limits on how much corporations and unions could spend advocating for or against candidates. The question was, does restricting this spending amount to censoring speech? The High Court considered whether a documentary film, critical of a presidential candidate, could be legally blocked from airing under campaign finance laws. The court's majority ultimately decided it could not. This video will explore the legal arguments, the dissenting opinions, and the profound, documented impact of Citizens United on campaign finance law and American elections in 2026. What exactly did the court say, and what has been its lasting legacy? In 2008, a non-profit organization called Citizens United released a 90-minute documentary film titled Hillary, the movie. The film, critical of then-presidential candidate Hillary Clinton, was scheduled to air on television through video-on-demand services within 30 days of primary elections. This seemingly straightforward act of political expression would soon ignite one of the most significant and contentious legal battles in modern American history, forever reshaping campaign finance law and the very landscape of political speech. The Federal Election Commission, or FEC, citing the Bipartisan Campaign Reform Act of 2002, commonly known as McCain-Feingold, determined that Hillary, the movie, constituted electioneering communication. This designation meant that the film could not be aired during that specific pre-election window, effectively censoring its distribution under existing campaign finance regulations designed to prevent undue corporate and union influence on elections. The penalty for violating these restrictions could be a fine of up to $10,000 and up to 5 years in prison for those responsible. But Citizens United, believing its First Amendment rights were being violated, refused to comply. The organization challenged the FEC's ruling, arguing that the restriction on their film was an unconstitutional prior restraint on free speech. What began as a dispute over a documentary about a presidential candidate rapidly escalated into a direct challenge to a cornerstone of campaign finance reform. This case wasn't just about one film. It was about the fundamental question of whether corporations and unions possess the same free speech rights as individuals, particularly when it comes to spending money to influence elections. The implications of that question are still being debated today, with over $19 billion spent in the 2020 election cycle alone, much of it from independent expenditures directly impacted by the eventual ruling. The journey of Citizens United v. Federal Election Commission through the courts would be a complex one, culminating in a landmark Supreme Court decision that dramatically altered our understanding of money, speech, and democracy. We'll examine the core arguments, the precedent-setting rulings, and the enduring legacy of a case that continues to resonate with every election cycle. This seemingly straightforward act of political expression would soon ignite one of the most significant First Amendment cases in modern American history. Citizens United, a conservative nonprofit, had produced Hillary, the movie, a documentary highly critical of then-presidential candidate Hillary Clinton, intending to air it around the 2008 presidential primary. However, they immediately encountered a significant regulatory hurdle. The Bipartisan Campaign Reform Act of 2002, commonly known as the McCain-Feingold Act, specifically prohibited corporations and unions from using their general treasury funds for electioneering communications within 30 days of a primary election or 60 days of a general election. The Federal Election Commission, or FEC, determined that Hillary, the movie, fell squarely within this definition, thereby restricting its broadcast. Citizens United challenged these restrictions, seeking an injunction to prevent the FEC from enforcing the act against their film. They argued that the documentary constituted pure political speech, protected by the First Amendment, and was not a direct campaign coordination, which would be subject to different rules. This challenge forced the Supreme Court to confront a core legal question: whether corporations and unions possessed the same First Amendment free speech rights as individuals when it came to political spending. This question would lead to a Seismic 5-4 decision. However, they immediately encountered the Bipartisan Campaign Reform Act of 2002, McCain-Feingold. Specifically, Section 203 prohibited corporations and labor unions from using general Treasury funds for electioneering communications, broadcasts referring to a federal candidate within 30 days of a primary or 60 days of a general election. Citizens United argued this violated their First Amendment rights, claiming their film was political speech, not a campaign contribution. The case escalated to the Supreme Court. On January 21, 2010, the court delivered a Seismic 5-4 decision, reshaping campaign finance law. Writing for the majority, Justice Anthony Kennedy asserted that corporations and labor unions possess the same First Amendment rights as individuals to engage in independent political spending. The court ruled that limiting such spending amounted to censoring political speech. He famously argued that money is speech, stating that independent expenditures do not lead to quid pro quo corruption, a direct exchange of money for political favors. For instance, a union could now directly fund a television ad advocating against a candidate, something previously restricted. This decision struck down key sections of McCain-Feingold, dramatically broadening the scope of protected political speech. The majority's decision, however, was met with a powerful dissent, led by Justice John Paul Stevens, and joined by Justices Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Stephen Breyer, and Sonia Sotomayor. Justice Stevens argued vehemently that corporations are not natural persons and possess distinct characteristics and objectives, primarily profit-seeking, which should preclude them from equal First Amendment political spending rights. In his 65-page dissent, Justice Stevens wrote, "Corporations have no consciences, no beliefs, no feelings, no thoughts, no desires." The dissent predicted that allowing unlimited corporate and union spending would fundamentally distort the electoral process, giving outsized influence to wealthy entities and effectively drowning out the voices of ordinary citizens. Justice Stevens also meticulously referenced a century of jurisprudence and legislative efforts, including the Tillman Act of 1907, designed to curb corporate influence in elections, all of which he viewed the majority opinion as dismantling. The dissent highlighted the fear of quid pro quo corruption, arguing that even independent expenditures could lead to an appearance of corruption, undermining public confidence in government. For instance, the potential for a large corporate donor to later seek favorable regulatory treatment, even without direct coordination, was a central concern. This concern would soon manifest in new, unprecedented ways. Speech rights. This Seismic 5-4 decision fundamentally altered the landscape of American campaign finance. The immediate aftermath of the Citizens United ruling opened a new era for political spending. The decision essentially allowed corporations, unions, and other groups to make unlimited independent expenditures in elections. A direct consequence of this ruling, coupled with a subsequent D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals case, SpeechNow.org v. FEC, was the rise of super PACs. These political action committees can raise and spend unlimited amounts of money to support or oppose candidates, provided they do not coordinate directly with campaigns. For example, during the 2012 election cycle, super PACs, alongside a new class of nonprofit organizations, injected over $2.4 billion into federal elections. This new class, often referred to as dark money groups, such as 501c. 4s further amplified the opacity, spending unlimited amounts on political activities without disclosing their donors. The 2016 election solidified this trend, demonstrating a continuous surge in independent spending and fundamentally reshaping the financial dynamics of American politics. This shift ignited a decade of debate regarding its enduring legacy. The Court of Appeals ruling in Speech No. Org v. FEC, 2010, immediately spurred the proliferation of super PACs. These political action committees can raise and spend unlimited funds to support or oppose candidates, provided they don't coordinate directly with campaigns. The ruling also fueled the growth of dark money, allowing non-profit organizations to spend unlimited amounts without disclosing donors. For example, in the 2012 election cycle, super PACs spent over $600 million, a substantial portion from undisclosed sources. This dramatically amplified the financial influence of special interest groups and wealthy donors, fundamentally altering campaign strategy. A decade later, Citizens United remains a focal point of debate. Critics, including former President Barack Obama and organizations like Common Cause, argue it has exacerbated political polarization and given undue influence to corporate and wealthy donors. A 2015 New York Times/CBS News poll found 84% of Americans believe money has too much influence in political campaigns. While direct legislative attempts to overturn it have stalled, groups continue to push for stricter disclosure laws to increase transparency. The lasting implication is a continued erosion of public trust and a rebalancing of power that favors well-funded entities over individual citizens. Their donors. This effectively created a new class of political spenders operating outside traditional campaign finance regulations. The legal and political ramifications of Citizens United v. FEC continue to reverberate more than a decade later. While the majority emphasized free speech, the dissenting justices' concerns about corporate influence on elections have arguably materialized. The unprecedented flow of independent expenditures into political campaigns has undeniably reshaped how elections are funded and contested, leading to ongoing debates about the balance between First Amendment rights and the imperative to prevent corruption or the appearance of corruption in the democratic process. This foundational decision remains a focal point in discussions concerning campaign finance reform and the very nature of political participation in the United States in 2026. Ultimately, Citizens United didn't just redefine campaign finance law. It fundamentally altered the perception of who holds power in American elections. The Supreme Court's declaration that independent political spending by corporations and unions is a protected form of free speech under the First Amendment continues to fuel a vigorous national debate. It asks us to consider whether a system where money can be equated so directly with speech truly serves the public interest, or if it tilts the scales towards those with the deepest pockets. What are your thoughts on the enduring influence of super PACs and dark money in our electoral system? Have you ever felt that campaign advertising was more influenced by special interests than by individual voters? Share your perspective in the comments below. For more breakdowns of landmark legal cases that reshape our society, be sure to subscribe. If you found this explanation insightful, I recommend watching my deep dive into the legal challenges surrounding gerrymandering next. It's another crucial aspect of electoral integrity. This video presents publicly documented information. It is for educational purposes, not legal advice.